Hello students, welcome to the second video of Poetical Books. In this video, we will be looking the literary character of Hebrew poetry. Generally, there are two distinctive features for Hebrew poetry, the rhythm of sound and the rhythm of thought. So what is rhythm? Rhythm, we know that it is a pattern of sound. In Malayalam we call it talam, or in Hindi we call it tal. So that is rhythm. So the rhythm of sound. Rhythm of sound is a regular pattern of stressed or unstressed syllable in lines of Hebrew poetry. So it is a regular pattern. It's a regular pattern of stressed or unstressed syllables in lines of Hebrew poetry. The stress will be there. The sound stress will be there. It may be also be the repetition of sounds through devices like alliteration, assonance. So generally, how we distinguish the rhythm of sound? It is generally we seen in the poetry as the repetition of sounds through devices like alliteration or assonance. These are the figure of speech. Just we found the rhythm of sound. The second distinctive feature of Hebrew poetry is the rhythm of thought. So, what is the meaning of rhythm of thought? Rhythm of thought or sense is the balancing of ideas in a structured or systematic form. So, in the case of rhythm of sound, the pattern was present in the form of hearing. So, rhythm of thought means it's a balancing of ideas. It is present in the ideas, how the way we read the ideas in a structured or a systematic form. The primary vehicle of conveying rhythm of thought in biblical poetry is a feature or described parallelism of the members. So, generally, where we see the rhythm of thought in the biblical poetry, it is generally in the parallelism, especially in the poetical books. Many places we find the parallelism, similar kind of uh, lines will be there. So that area we find the rhythm of thought in biblical poetry. When we talk about Hebrew parallelism, parallelism has very much importance in the case of Hebrew poetry and ancient Near Eastern literature. A pervasive mode of thought in ancient Near Eastern literary circles, this parallelism was elevated with exceptional artistry by Hebrew poets. Hebrew poets use this parallelism very much in their literary writings. Although Hebrew parallelism is beyond absolute rigid categorization, it can be understood by the biblical example from the Psalms. Hebrew poets used it very much, and it is very much evident in when we read the book of Psalms. Now we will look the rhythm of thought or different kind of parallelism in detail. The first kind of parallelism is the semantic parallelism or the parallelism based on the words. The first one example we have here is a parallelism using synonymous words. Psalms 24 verse 2. For he founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. Here the word seas and waters are synonymous words. So this is the clear example for a semantic parallelism. The another example here is with a similar kind of terms. Psalms 1 verse 5. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor the sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Here the last two words, judgment and righteous, these are kind of synonymous words. So this is also an example for semantic parallelism. Another example we have here with a matched pair of words. Psalms 9 verse 8. He will judge the world in righteousness. He will govern the peoples with justice. Here the last two words of the two lines, righteousness and with justice. This righteousness and justice are kind of a matched or pair word. So this is also an example for the semantic parallelism. The last example for the semantic parallelism is using the opposite words. Psalms 37 verse 16. Better the little have the righteous have than the wealth of many wicked. Here the last word phrase righteous have and the last word of the second line the wicked. These both are opposite words. So this is also we can categorize in the list of semantic parallelism. The another prominent kind of parallelism used in biblical poetry is the progressive parallelism based on the logical sequence. That means once action's result will be in the next line. Here we have an example using the cause and effect. Psalms 37 verse 4. Delight in yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desire of your heart. So this is the first line's result will be the second line using cause and effect. The another kind of progressive parallelism is using a sequence. Psalm 37 verse 29. The righteous will inherit the land and dwell in it forever. So it is a using a sequence. The first line is continuing in the second line. The action or the result is continuing in the second line. Another kind of progressive parallelism is using deduction. I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. So this is an example of using deduction. Another example for progressive parallelism is using the metaphors. Psalms 18 verse 31. For who is God besides the Lord, and who is the rock except our Lord? Here God is compared as rock. So it is a metaphor used here. This is also an example for the parallelism, progressive parallelism. Another last example for the progressive parallelism is using explanation. Psalms 5 verse 10. Banish them for their many sins, for they have rebelled against you. So it is the first line gives first line is an action, and the it reason or explanation is given in the second line. So this is also an example for the progressive parallelism. Another kind of parallelism is grammatical parallelism. It is based on the choice of grammatical forms. The first example is using the parallel parts of speech. Psalms 19 verse 7 and 8 is an example for that. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of Lord are trustworthy, making the wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right and giving joy to the heart, and the commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. So, the similar kind of parts of speech you can observe in these lines. Another example for the grammatical parallelism is using word order. Psalms 1 verse 2. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. The word order in these lines are example for the grammatical parallelism. Another example is using the figure of speech called as ellipsis. Psalms 18 verse 41. We will learn what is ellipsis in detail after a few seconds. They cried for help, but there was no one to save them. To the Lord, but he did not answer. So here it is the figure of speech ellipsis is used so that we will see one word is missing. So that is basically ellipsis. So this is also an example for the grammatical parallelism. Now we will look into the second distinctive feature of Hebrew poetry, that is the rhythm of sound. The second distinctive feature of Hebrew poetry is the rhythm of sound, is demonstrated through variety of techniques used by the ancient poets. There are variety of techniques used by the ancient poet in order to give the rhythm of sound. So we will detailedly learn which are that techniques. One of the techniques used by the ancient poet in order to make the rhythm of sound is making an acrostic poem. What is an acrostic poem? An acrostic is a verse in which the initial letters of successive lines of stanza from an alphabet or word or phrase. The Old Testament in Hebrew contains 13 complete alphabetic acrostic poems. Acrostic poem means the initial letter or a word will be like A for apple, B for ball, C for cat. Just like that, the following lines will be starting. The initial word will be starting with the successive letters. So this kind of techniques is used in Hebrew poetry is called as acrostic poems. Psalms 9, 10, 25, 34, 37, 111, 112, 119, 145, Proverbs chapter 31 verse 10 to 31, Lamentation 1, 2, 3, 4, and are perhaps one of the examples. And Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 2 to 10, it is an incomplete acrostic poem. More than a matter of personal style, acrostic poem was a mimetic tool or a memory device in the ancient scribal schools. Why this kind of a method is used, figure of speech is used? In order to teach the students in the scribal schools, they wanted to teach the students the biblical scripture lessons, so they made uh, in a form that is easy for the people to memorize. Although it was somewhat artificial, as a literary feature is conveyed the ideas of order, progression, and completeness within the poetic message. Even though it is an artificial tool, it gives a message. Through that, the writer was have an idea, have an desire to teach some lessons to the students. Unfortunately, this aspect of Hebrew poetry cannot be appreciated fully in translations. So, one of the negatives of this kind of a proverbs or this kind of a poetic section is that we are not we cannot understand it fully because it is only applicable in the case of Hebrew poetry. More than the matter of personal style, the acrostic poem was a mnemonic tool or a memory device in the ancient scribal schools. These techniques basically used in the scribal schools in order to teach the students the scripture. Although it was somewhat artificial, a literary feature, it is conveyed ideas of order, progression, and completeness. This feature involves the ideas of order, progression, and completeness. So, whenever order, progression, and completeness come together, it will be easy for the students to remember it. Unfortunately, this aspect of Hebrew poetry cannot be appreciated fully in translation. Unfortunately, for us, this is not applicable because it is only applicable to the ancient Hebrew students. Uh, in our translation, this idea of acrostic poem is lost. So, for us, it is just a poem like Psalms, like any other Psalms. Another technique used in the Old Testament poetry in order to convey the rhythm of sound is the technique called as alliteration. A common feature in Old Testament poetry is alliteration, the consonants of sounds at the beginning of the words or syllables. It is mainly found in the beginning of the words or syllables. Again, the English translation is inadequate to represent the resonant Hebrew ish and I sounds. So, whenever it is translated to our Bible in English, it is not applicable because it is just a translation. We are not using the original words in Hebrew. We have an example here is Psalms 122 verse 6. The translation is Salah Shalom Yerushalayim, means it is Salah Shalom Yerushalayim. The first two words Salah and Shalom is a kind of best example for the alliteration. The translation is pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Another figure of speech used in Old Testament is assonance. Assonance is the rhythm of sound using the correspondence of vowel sounds often at the end of the words. It is the using of the correspondence vowel sounds at the end of the words. Like alliteration, assonance may be serve a literary ploy to emphasize an idea or theme. So, why this kind of assonance is used at the end of the words in order to emphasize that word so that it is easy for us to distinguish it from the other words. An example for this feature appears in Psalms 119 verse 29. There, the E class vowels sechol and sere, and the I class hirek is used in those two lines. The translation is like the transliteration is like this: Derek, Seker, Heser, Mimeni, Torekte, and Neni. So the whenever you hear the sounds, you will get a, rhythm or a correspondence. Vowel sounds are assonance here. The translation is Keep me from the deceitful ways. Be gracious to me through your law. The fourth major figure of speech used for the rhythm of the sound is paronomasia. Paronomasia. The Hebrew poets, especially the prophets, often incorporated paronomasia or wordplay. Paronomasia simply means wordplay into their poems and oracles. This wordplay consisted of repetition of words similar in sound but not necessarily in meaning to heighten the intended impact of the message. So, this is simply a wordplay. Uh, the Hebrew poets usually use this by adding an extra word that may not be necessary for the meaning, but in order to get a punch for their idea, they use a repetitive word. We have example for that. The prophet Amos saw a basket of summer fruit. In Hebrew, the word is used there is quais, and announced the end. Hebrew word for the end is kus. So the quais kus. Similarly, when it comes together, it gives a repetition tone. Another example is on his deathbed, Jacob predicted Judah, Yehuda would praised. The word for praised in Hebrew is Yahuda. So Yehuda, Yahuda by his brothers in Genesis chapter 49 verse 8. So this is also giving a repetitive tone. Another example is from Isaiah. And the prophet Isaiah ended his song of vineyard with this masterful stroke, that is from Isaiah chapter 5 verse 7. And he looked for justice. The word for justice in Hebrew is mishpat, but saw bloodshed. The word for bloodshed is mispa. So mishpat, mispa. So this is also giving a repetitive tone. The next line, for righteousness, sadaka, but heard cries of distress. That is means saka, sadaka, saka. So this is also giving a repetitive tone. So this is the way how the paronomasia is used in the Hebrew poetry. The fifth major figure of speech used in Hebrew poetry in order to give the rhythm of sound is called as onomatopoeia, the use of words that sounds like what they describe. So this is a using of words that describes how the object is. Was another feature conditioned by the orality of Hebrew poetry. The Israelites poets enhanced the vividness of the description of the reality around them by dipping into the rich catchy of onomatopoeic words into the Hebrew vocabulary. Israel poets use this kind of word so that they can easily communicate by hearing that word. The recipients get a picture of that idea. Samples of onomatopoeia in Old Testament include symbol interjection, wo in Hebrew, oi. Oi is a warning sound in Hebrew. So in English, it can be translated woe, as in Isaiah chapter 24, verse 16. The thunder, the word used in Hebrew is ram. So that is, it gives me a picture of somewhat thunder. In Psalms 81, verse 7, even quaking of the earth, ras, also used as onomatopoeic words in Psalms 68 verse 8, and the hoof beats of horses, that means dahora, 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 then means it's when it's pronounced fastly, it gives the hoof beats of the horses. That is, we can see in Judges chapter 5 verse 22. So this kind of using of words is called as onomatopoeia. Another figure of speech used for the rhythm of sound is ellipsis. What is ellipsis? Ellipsis is simply the omission of a word or words that would complete a given parallel construction. So it is the omission of word. One word will be absent from the parallel construction of words. Is common in Hebrew poetry and has been marked one of the criteria for distinguishing poetry from prose. By understanding ellipsis, we can understand one passage is whether it is prose in nature or poetry in nature. An example is found in Psalms 115, where their idols in verse 4 is acting as uh, ellipsis. So it is between the verse 5 to 7. The word their idols is acting as a ellipsis. Another major figure of speech used in Hebrew poetry in order to give the rhythm of sound is called as inclusio. The inclusio is a special form of repetition. So it is simply a repetition of a phrase. It is very much common in Hebrew poetry. This device is sometimes called as envelope figure. It acts as a envelope or cover for the entire section it comes. Since by repeating key words and phrases, the poet returns to the point from which he began. So, in the beginning and the end, we can see the same phrase. So, the poet is coming back to the same idea he began. So, what is in between the inclusio is very much important. Psalms 118 begins with verse 1 is begin and verse 29 is ending with the same phrase which the poet talks in verse 1 with the lines, gives thanks to the Lord for he is good, his love endures forever. The same phrase is the same verses are repeated in verse 29 also. So what is in between this verse 1 and 29 is very much important in order to understand the meaning of the entire section. So that is the figure of speech called as inclusio. So now we have seen the rhythm of thought in Hebrew poetry and the rhythm of sound in Hebrew poetry by seeing the different figure of speeches. Now we have to look the rhythm of form in Hebrew poetry. The first idea in rhythm of form in Hebrew poetry is meter. What is meter? Meter is the basic rhythmic form of a line in Hebrew poetry. Meter has been assumed in Hebrew poetry, one of the basics of the analogy with other kinds of poetry. Recent studies have challenged this assumption. The exact nature of the meter remains a topic of discussion. One thing about this is we are not exactly aware about the nature of Hebrew poetry's meter, but we will study it peripherally. The two common methods of gauging Hebrew meter are counting the stressed or accented syllables in a pairs. So in a lines. So how we are counting the meter? By counting the stressed or accented syllables in a line pair of poetry, counting the total number of syllables in the two lines of a poetry. So after that we are counting the total number of the total number of syllables in two lines of the poetry. For example, the four normal pattern is a three stress first line followed by two stressed second line. So the basic pattern here we can observe is that in the first line there will be three stressed syllables will be there. In the second line there will be two stressed syllables will be there. So the so-called quina or dirg meter of lamentation. So this kind of pattern is we can observe in lamentations and all. Other common pattern include three stress couplets. That means uh, first and the second line will have three stressed syllables, and the four stress lines 2 plus 2 and 4 plus 4. The another kind of meter we can observe in some parts of the Hebrew poetry is 2 plus 2 and 4 plus 4. That means first two lines there will be two syllables will be there, two syllables will be there, and in the next two lines there will be four syllables will be there. These approaches do not describe the meter so much as they provide a guide to its structure. So this is just we are binding up the poetry with a structure. So we are not exactly aware about the nature of Hebrew poetry. So this is just a way of understanding only. The second idea in the rhythm of form of Hebrew poetry is the strophe. What is strophe? Strophic patterns, the grouping of lines into larger units. So it is just like in the in the prose section we have paragraph. Just like in the poetic section we have the grouping of lines, that is basically called as strophe. The grouping of lines into larger units and not readily discernible in most Hebrew poetry, while certain acrostic poems exhibit the alphabetic strophic structure. The best way to understand in the Hebrew poetry about the strophe is in the acrostic poems. That means Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, according to the alphabet, each line starting. So each group, each line, starting paragraph or the strophe, it is starting with each strophe. So it can be divided into strophes. On occasion, Old Testament poems contain refrains or repeated lines of the text that may indicate the strophic structure. We have examples in Psalms 42, 43, 107, verse 8. So some areas there will be repetition. So this is also we can divide it into strophes, but more often there are no formal markers or stanzas in the poem. Thus, while greater structures of symmetry are assumed to exist in Hebrew poetry, there is no methodology that will demonstrate these strophic patterns with consistency and certainty. So we can divide it into different groups or strophes, but we cannot tell it is the same way the Old Testament or the Hebrew poetry was written, or the original author was intended like this way, because we don't know the exact nature of Hebrew poetry completely. So by now we have discussed the three literary characteristics of Hebrew poetry, that is the rhythm of thought, the rhythm of sound, and the rhythm of form. There are more things to be discussed in this field. In that, the major thing is Hebrew poetry is always connected with the life situations of the Hebrew people or the writer. Not only that, it was always musical in nature. The poetry of the Old Testament was all also musical in nature. It was usually intended to sung or chanted to the accompaniment of a musical instrument. So this poetry, Hebrew poetry, especially the Psalms, uh, usually it played with the accompaniment of instruments. That is example, many verses in the poetic sections and the Old Testament, we know we can find the names of the instruments they used to accompany with their singing. Deuteronomy chapter 31, Psalms 5, 6, all we can observe like this. The musicality of Hebrew poetry arranged in the artistry of literary form added an important liturgical dimension and aided the oral transmission of poetry. So this kind of a musicality, that they chanted it with a tune so that it is easy for them to memorize. So for example, if one tune is in our mind already, so we are very much familiar, it will be easy for us to get the lyrics or remember. It will be easy for us to remember the lyrics. Although the orchestral scores of Old Testament poetry are now lost, vestige of its musicality remains, particularly in Psalms. So even though the orchestral scores, the ideas are lost by the translation, but still it is a musical piece. The Israelite hymn book retained superscriptions denoting the specific accompaniment instruments. As I said, in the hymn book, we can observe the different names of the different musical instrument they accompanied with this song. Psalms 54, 55, 67, 150, all is an example for that one. The composer or the recipient, who is the composer and or the recipient, also is denoted in the superscription. Psalm 70, 72, 73, 77, 81, all is an example for this one. The occasion of prompting to the composition. Some psalms, what is the occasion this psalm should be sing? Or we have songs in the modern day in our Christian circle. We have different songs to sing in different occasions, just like that one. Uh, for the Hebrew people, this all psalms is not for all occasions. It has specific occasions, like example Psalm 45, 70, 92, 100, and the musical tune and arrangement to which the poem was played and sung. Psalms 12, 22, 39, 57, 58, uh, 80. So this is all example for this idea. So when we look Hebrew poetry this way, uh, several types of or several genres of Hebrew poetic pieces we can identify. So or we can we can separate these poetic sections into different genre in Hebrew poetry. The example historical anthologies like Numbers chapter 21, Joshua chapter 10 verse 13, or example for historical anthologies. Victory songs, Exodus chapter 15, Judges chapter 5. These are victory songs pieces. And curses, that is also we can identify as another genre, or we can categorize into another types in the Hebrew poetry. Curses, Numbers chapter 21 is an example for that. Taunt songs, Isaiah chapter 14, 47, and funeral songs, or used while in the funeral service. Second Samuel 1 verse 17 to 27, Jeremiah chapter 9 verse 17 to 22. Wisdom songs, Psalms 137 are the wisdom song. Royal songs, royal songs. Best example for the royal songs is Psalms 20, 21, 45. Hymns, the general hymns, Psalms 8 and 29. Songs of trust, Psalms 32, 38. Songs of litigation, Isaiah chapter 45, Micah 1 verse 1 to 7. Love songs, songs 4 verse 1 to 7. Wedding songs, Psalms 45, and the predictive poetry, Genesis chapter 49 verse 1 to 27, and Numbers chapter uh, 23 8 to 10, 19 to 24, like that. More than the generic category of the or generic genres we have discussed before, we can divide the poetry into different classification under these titles also.